Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's so great to see you all here. I'm Rosie Hidalgo, and I serve as the Director of the Office on Violence Against Women here at the Department of Justice. I'm so humbled. It's truly an honor to be gathered here with all of you in the great hall of the Department of Justice and with all of you who are participating online. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us today. Each one of you has been a crucial part of this remarkable journey of the Violence Against Women Act and advancing our nation's commitment to prevent and to improve our response to domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and other interconnected forms of gender-based violence, and ultimately our North Star to end all forms of gender-based violence. Your collective efforts have led to this pivotal moment. And it's an honor to welcome you as we reflect today on our unwavering commitment and dedication to increasing access to justice, to safety, to healing, and to having safe communities free from violence. We have an exciting and full agenda today, and throughout the day we're going to be exploring VAWA's origins, the critical importance of centering survivors, their leadership, their voices, their vision and courage, which is what even created VAWA to begin with. And it has been so instrumental to each reauthorization of VAWA. And we know we have further to go. In the past couple days, as we've gathered and held summits and talked to survivors and advocates, it has been an amazing opportunity to reflect on the progress made, but also take this moment for our charge for the next decade and the next 30 years ahead to go even further together. And we know that that also includes enhancing a federal coordinated community response that we're very committed to. And the CCR, the Coordinated Community Response at the local and state and tribal and federal level, that is the hallmark of VAWA. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so we thank you for the role that each and every one of you play in advancing that vision. None of this would be possible without your hard work and commitment. And so today is about centering the incredible work and advocacy of survivors, advocates, and partners who have made this progress possible, and those who've come before us as champions in this work. And we also honor those who've lost their lives, whose lives have been taken from them, and the amazing, loving people who love them, who then have become champions and leaders in this work as well, and we honor them. And we are fortunate today to be joined by some very special guests this morning. We have Jen Klein, Director of the Gender Policy Council at the White House, and her tremendous leadership here. And she serves also as assistant to the president, and as we all saw last night, the tremendous moving remarks of the president and the tremendous commitment of the Biden-Harris administration to advancing these goals. So we're just so grateful, Jen, that you could join us this morning. And we're honored to be joined by our Justice Department leadership, the Principal Deputy Associate Attorney General Ben Miser, who will be with us a little bit later today, our Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, and the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland. Attorney General Garland is entrusted with the tremendous responsibility of safeguarding our nation and of protecting and advancing civil rights. And we are deeply grateful for his unwavering support of the Office on Violence Against Women, of integrating this work throughout the Department of Justice, and for all his commitment to this mission and all these initiatives. So thank you so much, Attorney General, and please join me in welcoming him to hear remarks.
Thank you, Rosie, for that generous introduction and for everything that you do with respect to VAWA, the office, and combating violence against women. I am very honored to be able to welcome you to the Justice Department for the 30th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act. Three decades ago, VAWA transformed our national response to domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. Its enactment indicated a paradigm shift, not just in the way we address gender-based violence, but in the way we understand it. I was serving as Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General when VAWA was originally enacted in 1994. In that role, I had an all-too-clear picture of the way that domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking were often handled in police stations, prosecutors' offices, and courtrooms across the country. As Attorney General Janet Reno later described, many, quote, representatives and participants in the criminal justice system looked at domestic violence cases and said, "That's a domestic," and they just turned their back. That was so, even though at the time, as Congress found, 1/3 of women murdered in America, approximately 4,000 per year, were murdered by present or former spouses or partners. The same was true of sexual assault. During the VAWA hearings, survivors and experts testified about the devastating effect of prevailing attitudes that distinguish between a rape by a stranger as compared to a rape by an acquaintance, a date, or a partner, and that frequently put the blame on the victim. Congress found that women reported 100,000 rapes to law enforcement in 1990, more than in any previous year in American history. That figure was estimated to represent only 1/3 of the true number. Another 2/3 of victims declined to report to police. Fewer than half of the reports resulted in arrests. VAWA has helped to change that perception and reality. The act gave the federal government tools to intervene in a sphere that had previously been largely the domain of state and local law enforcement. It created new resources and authority to prevent and prosecute these crimes and to support survivors. In so doing, it sent a message. Gender-based and intimate partner violence is not just a private matter, not just a local matter, but a national crisis, one that our country was no longer willing to tolerate. Today, officers, prosecutors, judges, families, and society at large understand what should have always been clear. Domestic and dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking are violent crimes. They cannot be ignored as somehow distinct or private. Today, we recognize that they are among the most serious crimes that our society faces. We recognize the devastating lifelong effects that gender-based violence can have on both the physical and mental well-being of survivors. We recognize that domestic violence calls are among the most dangerous for first responders and victims alike. We recognize that those who have engaged in sexual or domestic violence are far more likely to harm both current and future partners and children, as well as being a danger to the public at large. We recognize that this danger multiplies when these individuals possess a firearm. And we insist that the federal government has not just a duty, not just a role, but must intervene. To return to the words of Attorney General Reno, who said during VAWA's enactment, we recognize that addressing domestic and sexual violence must be, quote, a linchpin in the attack on violent crime. Today, We have the opportunity to recognize the impact that VAWA has had on our country for the past 30 years. We also recognize what it took to ensure VAWA's passage in 1994 and its reauthorization in 2000, 2005, 2013, and 2022. And we recognize that we would not be here today if not for the survivors who offered their powerful and often heartbreaking testimony to their communities with reporters and in congressional hearings. They made real for lawmakers and the American public the toll that these crimes take on women, men, children, families, and entire communities. We also would not be here without the advocates and experts who work to amplify survivors' stories and experiences and put forward solutions. They underscored the need for stronger protections to hold offenders accountable and the need to increase access to services for victims in the aftermath of these terrible crimes. Many of these advocates and survivors are here today. On behalf of the Justice Department and the American people, thank you. Not yet. I have so much more to say. The progress our country has made in addressing gender-based and intimate partner violence is also the result of the work of professionals who have dedicated their lives to carrying out VAWA's promise over the past 30 years. I want to thank the service providers on the front lines who work every day with survivors to ensure that they continue to have a voice, that they are believed, and that they receive the support they need to heal and rebuild their lives. You are true heroes. I want to thank our criminal justice partners, law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and judges. You ensure that perpetrators are held accountable, that the rule of law is upheld, and that survivors are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. And finally, I want to thank my colleagues here at the Department of Justice who work tirelessly behind the scenes to implement VAWA's protections. You develop policies and resources to improve investigations and prosecutions. You administer millions of dollars in grant funds every year to support the protection services that survivors need. You enforce laws and prosecute cases in Indian country and advance efforts to end the crisis of missing or murdered Indigenous persons. You defend federal law protections, including in the Supreme Court's last term, when you successfully defended the ban on firearm possession by individuals subject to civil protection orders. Although my position at DOJ in 1994 gave me a grim view into the treatment of gender-based crimes before VAWA, it also gave me a vantage point to see the shift that followed. In 1995, that meant being there as Janet Reno stood up the original Office on Violence Against Women. Since its creation, OVW has awarded and administered more than $11 billion in grants and other funding. I've had the opportunity to work with Rosie and her incredible OVW team, many of whom have been with the office since its founding. I am in awe of their passion, deep expertise, and commitment. I am moved by the relentless work to reach every person touched by these crimes and to show by example that the Justice Department can be an effective and caring partner in this effort. Thank you, Rose. Today, we take stock of the progress that VAWA has advanced, but we recognize that there is so much more to do. The reality remains that in the United States, more than 1 in 3 women experiences sexual violence, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner within her lifetime. And tribal and historically marginalized groups are disproportionately affected. That is why it was so essential that Congress reauthorized VAWA in 2022, and it is why the Department of Justice remains committed to using every tool at our disposal to end domestic violence, sexual violence, and stalking, and to support survivors. As part of that effort, I announced this week that the Department is awarding a total of $690 million in grants, all through programs created under VAWA. Among those are awards of more than $171 million across all 50 states and 6 territories under the Stop Violence Against Women Formula Grants program. This program promotes a coordinated community response among law enforcement, prosecutors, courts, victim services organizations, and other community services to ensure the safety of survivors. We are also awarding nearly $6 million under the Enhancing Investigation and Prosecution of Domestic Violence, Dating Violence, Sexual Assault, and Stalking initiative. These funds will be used to promote effective policing and prosecution strategies. We are also leveraging the FBI, ATF, U.S. Marshals, and U.S. Attorney's offices throughout the country. Today, I designated an initial set of 78 communities across the country, with more to follow, where we will surge department resources to combat firearm violence against intimate partners and children. We will designate special assistant U.S. attorneys to focus on this effort, and Justice Department agents and prosecutors will work hand in hand with community stakeholders to develop strategies and prioritize prosecutions for unlawful possession of a gun by those who have committed domestic violence offenses. The program will build on the innovative initiatives that U.S. attorneys' offices are already leading to target domestic violence in their districts. That includes the Western District of Oklahoma's Operation 922 program, which has charged hundreds of domestic abusers with federal firearms offenses to quickly remove abusers from the home, to protect the victims over whom the abusers exert control, and to safeguard law enforcement responding to domestic calls. Together, we do everything, and we will do everything we can to get firearms out of the hands of those who have engaged in domestic abuse. In concert with our work to protect survivors and promote healing, this will save lives. I know that for many of the people in this room, the success story of the Violence Against Women Act is personal. It reflects remarkable vision, decades of advocacy and hard work, steadfast commitment to survivors, and triumph over personal tragedy. To all of you, thank you. You have changed our world. You have saved lives, and you have improved countless lives. I look forward to our continued work together. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you again, Attorney General Garland. We're so pleased he was able to join us this morning before departing for a very busy schedule today. But as you saw, the unwavering commitment of the Attorney General, not just now as leader of the Department of Justice, but throughout his whole career. And so it's just such an honor to have his remarks with us today to center us, to provide that foundation for the rest of our discussion today. And now it is my great honor to invite our next speaker, Jen Klein. As I mentioned, she serves as Assistant to the President and as the Director of the White House Gender Policy Council, which Jen established and led since the outset of this administration when the Gender Policy Council was created by President Biden by executive order to advance gender equity domestically and globally. And Jen comes with a tremendous career of commitment and work in the field to advance these goals, both domestically and globally, and her leadership has been phenomenal, including I had the great honor and privilege of working with Jen as she led the effort across many federal agencies to develop our first ever U.S. national plan to end gender-based violence. And it's the first ever framework, blueprint for a whole-of-government approach, but it also reflects all the input and guidance and work of survivors and advocates and people in the justice system and across all systems. It's based on those lessons learned, those guiding principles, that vision. So we are so pleased to have Jen with us today to provide some remarks as well. Please help me in welcoming her.
Thank you, Rosie, for that introduction. And I'm going to laugh at the definition of led because I wanted to start by thanking you for all that you have done and for teaching me so much. I had the privilege, as you just heard, of working with Rosie as she masterfully led our work at the White House, both on the VAWA reauthorization of 2022 and, of course, the development of the first ever national plan to end gender-based violence. And I also want to thank Attorney General Garland and, of course, Deputy Attorney General Monaco for your commitment to these issues and for having me here today. It's an honor to mark the 30th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act alongside all of you, survivors, advocates, experts, government partners, leaders in all ways, and partners in this work. I'll start by saying what this room already knows. VAWA is President Biden's proudest legislative achievement. He first introduced VAWA in 1990 when he was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he has championed it ever since. I can still remember, as a newly minted lawyer and very young staffer in President Clinton's White House, how then Senator Biden made it possible. And I'm looking at so many of the staff who made it possible with him, so thank you. Thanks to his leadership, and as I said, the work of so many who are here right here with us today, VAWA fundamentally transformed our nation's response to violence against women and girls. And we've been building on this critical legislation together ever since, through 4 reauthorizations, including through the VAWA reauthorization of 2022 during this administration, so that each time we've made the law stronger and more responsive to the needs of all survivors. As we heard from the President yesterday, it matters. Even with the progress we've made, of course, there is still so much to do to prevent and end gender-based violence, which is why this administration has made historic investments in VAWA. The President often says, "Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value." And the Biden-Harris administration values investing in communities so that we can finally end gender-based violence. Thanks to the President's leadership, we've increased funding for VAWA programs by more than 35% since 2021, securing more than $700 million, the highest ever funding level for VAWA implementation. Of course, the Department of Justice is leading this effort and has distributed record funding to states, territories, tribes, coalitions, law enforcement, and more to fund the programs that we know survivors and our nation need and deserve. There's so much more I could say about VAWA and the law's legacy, and that's the work you're going to get to today. I also want to take a moment to put this in the context of the President's broader legacy as a champion of gender equality and equity. So in addition to his unwavering support and leadership on VAWA, he's taken action to address gender-based violence wherever and whenever it occurs, at home, at work, in the military, in schools, in communities, and even online. As president, he's advanced bipartisan reforms to the military's investigation and prosecution of sexual assault and sexual harassment. He signed into law the VOCA Fix Act, which has provided more than $1.4 billion for the Crime Victims Fund to support local programs and services for victims of crime, including survivors of gender-based violence. The President's American Rescue Plan invested nearly $1 billion for domestic violence and sexual assault services and supports through the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act. And he's directed his administration to address online harassment and abuse, including deepfakes and online child sexual exploitation. The President finally, as you heard, directed the White House Gender Policy Council to develop the first ever national plan to end gender-based violence, which, thanks to the incredible work of the leaders in this room, we issued last year to guide the administration's efforts to prevent and address gender-based violence really across the entire federal government, working, again, with all partners, including state, local, tribal governments. These are just some of the examples of the work this administration has done in service of our commitment to preventing and ending gender-based violence. So I'll close by saying that it's a privilege to be here today among so many friends, partners, and colleagues, because this work truly takes all of us. Thank you each for the work you do day in and day out. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Rosie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen, for your remarks, your leadership, and the opportunity to really help us all be able to strengthen our federal coordinated community response. And now it's my great honor and privilege to be able to introduce the Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco. As the Department of Justice second-ranking official, she oversees the overall operations of the Department of Justice, and she has dedicated her career to reducing violent crime and increasing access to justice. I could say a lot about her bio, but what I want to focus on today as we commemorate the 30th anniversary of VAWA is that she started her career as a young staffer in the Senate Judiciary Committee for then-Senator Biden, and played a pivotal role in reaching out to survivors so that they could get their testimony, in calling shelters and advocates to get their input. So it's just so fortuitous that as we gather here today to mark this pivotal milestone, that we can also just express deep gratitude for her leadership here at the Department of Justice, not just for VAWA 94, but also her critical role with VAWA 22 and supporting and guiding the reauthorization, the expansion, the enhancements of VAWA also through her leadership. And so we at the Office on Violence Against Women are deeply grateful, as I know all in the field are, for your leadership and steadfast commitment to advancing this work. So please help me welcome our Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco.
Good morning, everybody. It is great to see this great hall full to the brim for this anniversary. Really fantastic. Thank you, Rosie, for that very kind introduction. I am very grateful for your leadership and the critical work that you and your entire team at OVW do every single day to work to eradicate gender-based violence across the country. It's an honor to be with you to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act, and I want to add a special welcome to the many department alumni who are here today. Welcome back. And of course, to the leaders, the advocates, the survivors who were the engine behind VAWA years ago and who continue to push us all forward. Thank you for your service and for being here today. Now, the work of so many here today and so many more beyond this great hall produced the first ever comprehensive law to address violence against women in our nation's history. For so many of you, this anniversary carries particular significance, and I know it does for me as well. I was privileged to play a very small part in the passage of the original Violence Against Women Act 30 years ago, as Rosie said, as a young staffer on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Now, as we all know, President Biden led the charge for VAWA as chairman of that committee. But the drafting of that legislation was not a dry legal exercise, nor was it about making technical fixes to the U.S. Code. No, it was at its core about changing attitudes and righting a fundamental wrong. It was about bringing an epidemic of violence out of the shadows, and yes, by sheer force of will and determination of so many, it was about asking the public and demanding that the Congress confront the woeful failure of our criminal justice system to protect survivors and to hold perpetrators accountable. To shed light on this crisis, and to shed light on what was happening, Chairman Biden charged his staff to make the case. And with the advocates and survivors and law enforcement and so many others, that's what we did. Now, as Rosie mentioned, I was just out of college, not even a baby lawyer at the time. To say I was a low-level staffer would be to have given me a promotion. My job was to handle constituent mail and basically to do whatever else the lawyers on staff told me to do. Lucky for me, they put me to work. There was one project in particular that stood out. The idea was to document a week in the life of women in America, exposing the epidemic of violence against women in America, to lay bare the effect on everyday lives, to expose the problem of repeat offenders and the failure of protective orders, to describe this violence's impact on children. Working on that report, working on that committee 3 decades ago, I learned from survivors why we needed the Violence Against Women Act. I read and responded to countless letters, mostly from women, who wrote in heart-wrenching detail about the brutal violence and excruciating pain they were suffering, often at the hands of a spouse or an intimate partner. We talked with rape crisis centers, domestic violence shelters, emergency rooms, police stations across the country to gather data that showed how our system was failing victims and survivors and failing to hold perpetrators accountable. The statistics at the time painted a very grim picture. 98% of rape survivors never saw their attacker caught, tried, and imprisoned. Fewer than half of people arrested for rape were convicted, and almost half of convicted rapists could expect to serve a year or less in jail. But in September of 1994, that began to change. For the first time, VAWA provided legal protection and resources to survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. It empowered federal law enforcement to go after perpetrators who crossed state lines and required state authorities to enforce protection orders from other states, freeing survivors to leave violent situations. It closed a major loophole, codifying what should have always been patently obvious, that there is no such thing as consent to sexual acts between federal officers and those held in their custody. It provided legal relief for battered immigrants and created the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which of course is such a vital resource still today. And for the first time, VAWA provided critical funding to those who touch survivors, from law enforcement to social services, to access programs and tools and training. The landmark law we celebrate today profoundly changed how this country protects survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. Now, as this gathering knows very well, none of this happened overnight, far from it. It took years of painstaking, brave work by survivors and advocates across this country, building a nationwide movement to end violence against women and support the rights and dignity of survivors. It was these survivors and advocates who started the domestic violence shelters and rape crisis centers, who lobbied the state legislatures to outlaw marital rape and protect victims against their abusers, who fought against harmful myths and stereotypes, urging law enforcement to take violence against women seriously, who organized for campus safety and accountability for offenders, who formed the victim-centered service organizations that continue to push for needed reforms today. Without them, VAWA would not exist, and we would not be here today. So please join me in thanking those leaders who were not only there in 1994, but in 1984 and 1974 and 1964 and long before that. Since VAWA's enactment, we've increased justice for survivors and accountability for wrongdoers. And today, with the largest funding level ever, VAWA's programs are providing more access to services like transitional housing and legal support for survivors, more resources to help law enforcement respond, and more capacity to keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. And today, we're also addressing the next frontier in gender-based violence, the proliferation of deepfake images and videos fueled by artificial intelligence. That's why the department is funding a new National Resource Center on cybercrimes and awarding new local law enforcement grants for the enforcement of cybercrimes to bolster training for law enforcement, prosecutors, and judges. This anniversary recognizes the Violence Against Women Act and all of you who made it happen. And it recognizes that VAWA has been transformative in so many ways, in law, in culture, in attitudes. And it was transformative, too, for me in another way. The experience of working with those lawyers, a bevy of fantastic women lawyers, all working for then Chairman Joe Biden, on the Judiciary Committee, and the experience of working on this legislation 30 years ago inspired me to go to law school, to become a lawyer, and to go into public service. That's because I saw what you could do with the law to help people and to protect victims. I was exposed to my very first mentors and role models. I witnessed their relentless drive, smarts, and dedication to getting this law enacted. They were helping bring about real change that would have an impact on people's lives. These women, some of whom you will hear from in a moment, were instrumental in the passage of VAWA, and they were an example for me. Without them, or that experience 30 years ago, I wouldn't be here today as the Deputy Attorney General. I am grateful to be able to recognize them and thank them from this podium today. Cynthia Hogan, Victoria Nurse, Demetra Lambros, and Kathy Russell. Thank you. Our progress to address gender-based violence hasn't been linear, and it's far from finished. The legacy, though, of the Violence Against Women Act is in the courage and the stories and the voices of the victims and survivors who made the original law possible. And it's in the future work by all of us to shape a safer world for women everywhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco. Now you all understand why we're so thrilled that our OVW team gets to work with the Deputy Attorney General under her leadership and unwavering commitment and support. And she highlighted the crucial role of some of the attorneys on the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time, who played such an important role in the drafting of VAWA. So it's our great honor and privilege to welcome up with us Victoria Norris, Demetra Lambros, and Cynthia Hogan, who are here with us today for a panel discussion. We'd call it a fireside chat, but we don't have the fireplace with us today. But it'll be a lovely discussion to hear from them about that crucial moment of the drafting of VAWA and the implementation and the impact it's had. So please come join us. Oh, there's the mics. Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us here and for traveling to be with us. And, you know, Victoria, I would love to start with you and just hear from you with the role that you played, such a pivotal role in helping draft, negotiate, and develop the original Violence Against Women Act, and what the landscape looked like that you were looking at. The Deputy AG talked about that a little bit, but the landscape you all were facing, and just any of your highlights of pulling that together.
Well, can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, Rosie, you've done such an amazing job. I want to also thank the Attorney General for taking the time to come down here. And I want to thank someone, I think this was the best assignment, you know, I'm a law professor, the best assignment I ever gave was to ask Lisa Monaco to do some work on 1 week in the life of America. I had forgotten about that report. And I'm a little bit absent-minded since I'm a professor, so I'm going to read a few things because it's kind of an emotional day for us. Why? Well, it was a lonely job. What's amazing in the last 2 days is to see how many people have invested their lives in something that we just saw a glimmer of and were honored to be a part of. So, okay, I'll take you back to the day. Yeah, it's true, I'm a law professor, and I went to the library to do all the scribes. Why? There were no women there. There were 2 women in the Senate. And I've told this story before, but what I really want to emphasize today is the role of a certain person who happens to be the President of the United States. It's June of 1990, and then Senator, now President Biden, is a bit late. He is about to begin a hearing that would change millions of lives. And I've only been on the Judiciary Committee for about 6 months, and I'm tapping my heel in the staff chairs behind the big leather chairs that the senators sit in, and I'm really nervous. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I have asked 3 women to share excruciating testimony that the walls of the Senate Judiciary Committee have never heard. These are the hidden figures of VAWA. We've forgotten their names, but that testimony and those hearings are seared in my memory. I had reason to worry. Why? In the 1980s, senators denounced feminism as a conspiracy to destroy the American family. Battered women's shelters were called by one senator indoctrination centers for runaway wives. Runaway wives. So if past were prologue, these hearings weren't going to go very well. And that hearing room, it intimidates. It's got really high ceilings, chandeliers. There are no women there, just me sitting in the behind. And it's up to Biden to make this work. So I knew sitting there that he was committed to the fight because I'd worked with him on all of the proposals. But still, I knew that people did not believe. I knew the law did not believe. The culture denied that these things existed. It was a day and age in which liberal icons of the left, declared battering to be American as apple pie. Newspapers still reported sick jokes that women should just relax. But to see pain requires a name, a set of categories, and contradiction was built into things like date rape. It's not, what kind of a date is it if you're raped? Domestic violence implied something that domesticates a punch. And I wondered whether he really got it. It was too ugly for people to see. Time magazine in 1990 said the fight for women's equality had been won. Ms. Magazine, for whom I write occasionally, said that equality may be bad for women. Women have so much, a former president named Ronald Reagan said, that the White House need not appoint them to higher office. So as I sat there waiting for that hearing, I also knew that police in many localities, as the Attorney General said, had to see a man beat a woman to arrest. When we started, one of the surveys funded by your tax dollars on crime did not even count rape. Police would ignore protective orders gained in one state, and then if the abuse was in another state. SVUs, you know, we've got television shows. They were rare. Battered women's shelters said to me that their second source of funding was bake sales. So we were pretty lonely. We were operating in a culture that really did not want to see it. It was ugly. So I was the scribe, the future law professor, the nerd. But the real authors are those women, those hidden fingers who were sitting there that day. They had the courage to come forward and tell America something they didn't want, the country didn't want to hear. And Joe Biden, he got it. The first thing he said when he came to the hearing room was, "I wish we didn't have to sit up here on the dais looking down on you. If it gets tough, just turn off the mic and we'll slow down. I know this is going to be hard. I know. But America needs to hear this." I'm truly honored to be a part of these ladies. I decamped to go teach law, and they finished the job. So over to them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Victoria, for sharing that with us and really putting us there and reminding us what this was about and continues to be about. And Cynthia, if I could turn to you, knowing that you played a pivotal role. Once Victoria left to the law school, that you were there helping lead the charge to negotiate drafts. What were some of the key challenges? How were you all able to accomplish this in a bipartisan way? And what are some of the significant impacts you've seen?
Thank you so much. I was chief counsel and staff director at the Judiciary Committee under Joe Biden during these years. And I want to say a mark of my genius was that I was the person who hired a young college graduate named Elisa Monaco. And then when she came on board, I said to everybody on staff, give her some real work because she can handle it. Like others, I have tried to engage in a mental time warp the last few weeks to get ready for this and to think about what the world was like 30 years ago. I was with then Senator Joe Biden when his colleagues came up to him and said, "Why are you doing this? This is a family matter." And Joe Biden said to them, "No, it's criminal violence." And it took a long time to get it done. I mean, it was introduced in 1990, as you've heard. We had a series of really fantastic hearings that brought the knowledge more broadly of what really was going on. And the survivors who testified really were incredible. They taught all of us, and they revealed to everyone how deep a problem it was, how wide a problem it was, and how much we needed a national solution. We had the hearings. The Deputy Attorney General put out a lot of good reports. And we had the act. Joe Biden knew that he did not have the votes to get it passed standalone in the Senate. So we were engaged in another bill, which ended up being the 1994 crime bill. And it had a lot of great stuff in it around support for police and things. It had some really tough things in it too. You know, this was a legislative compromise, and we took some stuff we didn't like in order to get it passed. But while it was on the floor, George Mitchell, as Majority Leader, Joe Biden, and Senator Robert Byrd, because he was brilliant, pulled a sleight of hand and got a huge amount of funding put into the crime bill, at which point Joe Biden turned to me and said, we're putting VAWA in here so it can get funded, and passed. So it was added, the House passed it, then it came back over to the Senate for final passage. If Joe Biden is the father of VAWA, I'd like to say that maybe we're the mothers. And but again, just to give you a sense of Joe Biden as a person, the bill passes. It's very late in the evening, dark out. He and I walk outside to the steps of the Capitol. The moon's above us, and he turns to me and says, Cynthia, you've done something really important here. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it was all me. And said to him, thank you, Mr. Senator, for getting this done, for thinking of it, for driving it, for withstanding all of the heat he took and getting it done. He really is the person who brought this to us.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Thanks for being a mother of VAWA, for your vision, for your leadership, and your contributions. Sure.
Sorry, I wanted just to add one more thing. A couple of years after VAWA was enacted, I got a call from the head of the National Sheriff's Association. And, you know, these guys were tough guys. He came in usually to, you know, yell at me for something. And he comes in his cowboy hat and cowboy boots, and I'm like, oh boy, I better get ready here. And he says to me, Cynthia, the Violence Against Women Act is the single most important thing the federal government has ever done to fight crime. Because, as he pointed out to me, if you look at who's in state prisons, a huge percentage of them are people who grew up in violent homes. They learned violence there, and they took it with them. And so, as important as it is, the lives that have been saved and the coordinated law enforcement response and assistance that's now given to survivors, VAWA has had a much broader effect, and it's an important one. So, again, hats off to Joe Biden.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. And, you know, Demetra, would love to turn to you now and, you know, share any of the challenges that you also helped to overcome in developing VAWA. But also, as we were talking in preparation for this, you know, Demetra had shared how now there in Missoula, Montana, where you live, that you're involved at the local level as a volunteer on addressing these issues. And what have you seen? What have you seen to be the impact of VAWA now, 30 years later?
One of the things I do take away,
Is it working?
yeah, is like, I thought of the DAG, Lisa, as our intern, like, lesson, be nice to your interns. They're going to get on a rocket someday. I remember that night too. It was crazy. Actually, it was midnight. Cynthia got the funding for this thing. A bunch of folks did not want us to put the Violence Against Women Act as part of the crime bill. You know, at the time, as a staffer, you're like listening to everybody and you want to accommodate everybody's concerns. I remember I was like 10 months pregnant, going into the bathroom, screaming into the mirror and saying, like, forget them all, turning off my phone and just going back calmly and saying, of course we're going to put the Violence Against Women Act into the crime bill because it is what secured its funding for all those years. Even though it was the neighbor with some other provisions, I don't think anybody remembers that now because it has survived as one of the most important legacies of that bill. As Rosie said, I'm lucky enough actually to now live in Missoula, Montana, where I've had the chance to see actually the legacy of VAWA on the ground. The genius of VAWA really is that it recognized that there has to be a coordinated, multidimensional response to this problem. And I've had the good fortune to see it. We have the advocates at the shelter staff that goes over to the hospitals, that holds the survivors' hands and just starts getting them connected with resources. The nurses who are doing exams and collecting evidence. The cops and the detectives who have come such a long way, you've heard a lot about it already, who are now really trained, and thanks so much to all the training grants that come out of OVW, in trauma-informed responses and interviews, the legal advocates, the prosecutors, also, many of them now in my little town, women, who really get how to do these cases. All these folks get together like once a month to share strategies and cases. You know, less regularly, but still in the mix are judges, the county attorneys, housing specialists, and the service providers, of course. And there are so many more services than were there in the 1990s. At the time, there was like a little house that was the shelter, no services. You know, the abusers were stalking the place. Now, there's a 24-hour hotline crisis line. There's legal help, there's there's pet support. There's emotional and employment counseling, there's housing assistance, there's food assistance, there's shelter. Now, look, of course it doesn't operate perfectly, but in my little town, it's VAWA in a bottle, really, just like these dedicated, specially trained professionals all wrapping their arms around our town's survivors, and with all the same message. You aren't alone, it's not your fault, we're here to help.
Thank you so much, Demetra, for sharing both the critical role you played then and your ongoing role supporting this work and sharing the change you've seen. And Deputy Attorney General Monica, turning to you now, I think, you know, as we've talked about how crucial the services, the support, the funding, I think something else that we've seen is a societal change, right, in the perceptions. And would love to hear from you now in your role. Where have you seen the advances in the societal change, and where do you still think we need to go to advance the vision of VAWA?
Well, first, the only reason I get to sit up here with these guys is because of my current job, because it's not because of the role I played in 1994. I was so lucky just to be in the orbit. Where we need to go, I'll take the last part first, Rosie. Where we need to go is on some of the things that the Attorney General mentioned and that I mentioned in my remarks in terms of the next frontier of the threats, online harms that are being fueled by AI, that are fueling gender-based violence, I think is really what we need to be focusing on, and that's why we're committing that funding in this latest round. But in terms of a shift as a society, I'll give you just a little bit of a vantage point from the baby staffer who was just in awe of these women and just wanting to see them and say, geez, I want to be that. I want to be that. And I'll give you just a behind-the-scenes story. So on the floor during the managing the amendments to the crime bill, and as Cynthia and others have mentioned, VAWA was getting put into it along with a number of other things. But I remember that I never got to go over to the Senate floor because, did I mention I was a lowly staffer? But when we were getting ready to do the crime bill on the floor, the manager of that bill, the then chairman Joe Biden, and his staff were the ones who had to do all the work to manage the amendments and manage the floor time, et cetera. So we would truck over there. Now remember, it's 1994, and as Victoria mentioned, in 1990 there was how many women in the Senate?
2 women.
2 women in the Senate. Now, folks will have remembered there were some elections in the intervening years, and there was the year of the woman, right, in the Senate. So, you know, they went up to a number of other women, Dianne Feinstein, Carol Moseley Braun, a number of folks, and it was a big deal that you had now more than 2 women in the Senate. Well, the Senate floor hadn't seen anything yet, because these folks were now coming over to spend it was a week or 2 that the crime bill was on the floor. There was a rule, my memory, maybe I have this wrong, you guys can correct me. My memory is that there was a rule that women on the Senate floor had to be wearing a skirt.
We got rid of that.
Cynthia.
Yeah, but here's how they did it. There was no rules committee, there was no, 7 layers of votes and committees. They just did it. They went over there in their pantsuits and just said, we're here, we're doing this crime bill, we're Joe Biden's staff. He was having none of it, right? And just by sheer force of presence and will, they did it. And so all of a sudden, then the rest of us, the lowly staffers, I'm looking at you, Jen Volan, in the back, she and I, my fellow low-level staffer, helping, literally carrying their binders to do all this work, we're like, well, I guess we can wear pants too. And that's how it happens. That's how it happens. So that's what I remember, and it's a theme, right? It was because of the strength of the survivors and the victims and the advocates to say, you know what, we're not going to have any more of this. We've got to change. We're going to speak up. We're going to wear pants, proverbially, right?
I have to break in here to tell you that Minority Leader Dole's senior floor staff did come over to me and say, you're not supposed to be wearing pants. And I said, well, you know what? I have to sit on the floor, so I'm going to wear pants. Thank you very much.
Exactly right.
And that was it.
And that's how it happened. So that was one of the many lessons I took from these phenomenal women.
Well, thank you so much for sharing thank you so much for these stories of perseverance, vision, leadership. We know we stand on the shoulders of many giants and sheroes, many others who weren't able to join us today as well, many who had this vision, and I'm so glad you acknowledge all those who also came the decades before. But so glad that you all were where you are when you seized the moment to help, this country have the most significant federal landmark legislation in a bipartisan way to prevent and end gender-based violence. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and we all carry forward with the charge to strengthen the coordinated community response and continue changing social norms so that we can have not just social services, but social transformation where everyone can live free from violence. So thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Okay, we are now going to transition, and it's my great honor to ask Linda Fan, our Deputy Director for Policy, Communications, and Strategic Engagement at OVW, to come join us up here with some remarkable women and men and advocates and survivors for this next panel. While they're taking the stage, I just want to give a huge shout out to Linda, who's just a force of nature herself, coming from tremendous work in the field, coming as someone who was an executive director of a culturally specific program in Texas, worked in the Texas Council on Family Violence, and give it up. and really plays a huge role representing OVW, working with a lot of our components across Department of Justice and advancing policies as well that are so crucial. So thank you, Linda, from the bottom of my heart. I don't even think she has slept all week because she's also the one, she and Allison and I have failed to take a moment of privilege that weren't in my remarks, to also highlight Allison Randall, our Principal Deputy Director at OVW, and who was OVW Acting Director for 2 years, and all the amazing, mission-driven, committed staff of OVW. None of this would be possible without the tremendous effort. So now that we also have a tremendous panel here, Linda, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosie. And thank you all for being here. As Rosie mentioned, I do have such an incredible honor to serve as the Deputy Director of Policy here. And essentially, I get to still engage with the field and with advocates and with survivors. I've spent 25 years in the field, so it's always great to be in spaces like this. It's like a reunion. It's always like a reunion with friends. But so for this panel, I really, it's an absolute pleasure to actually be able to moderate this panel. And as you've heard from the panel before, how survivors were critical and crucial in the drafting of the Violence Against Women's Act. But it's not just the original inception of the legislation, it's the continual implementation of VAWA and the spirit of VAWA. So at OVW, and really at the Department of Justice, we have an unwavering commitment in rooting lived experiences and survivor voices, because we know that survivors lead. They lead us in this work. And we truly believe that progress happens when those who have walked the path leads us in that path, right? So I'm honored to have our esteemed panelists, Ruth Glenn, Caitlin Mathis, Courtney Fields, Lisbeth Perez, Tom Crimmins, and Christina Love. And all of our guests today have been at the forefront of pushing for policy and advocacy. We have to balance our time. There's a little bit of scarcity of time and tremendous amount of insight and knowledge here. So what I'm going to do is ask the first question, and answering the first question, I ask that you introduce yourself. All right. What does it really mean to be survivor-led when we're talking about the implementation of VAWA? Ruth, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Linda. What does it mean? I think that someone said it yesterday, probably the best, and I believe it was Kate Ranta, when she said, do not just make it a checkbox. They have to be at every level of the work that you do, every level, whether it's your staff, whether you have them come in as an event speaker. Elizabeth and I were talking about that earlier. Have them on your board. Make sure that you're not just acting as though you have survivors present. And I know everyone has the best intention, but sometimes we do it as a checkbox and we're not really hearing. And I think when we're implementing the Violence Against Women Act, it's very, very critical that you ask survivors as well, what does that mean to them? Here's the skinny on VAWA. That's my new word, skinny. Here's the skinny on VAWA. What do you think about that? And then really, even if it means taking those notes, do that. So it's not just perfunctory and performative, it's real. So that's my thought on that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Hi, good morning. You said also introduce yourselves. Yes. I'm Courtney Fields. I'm from the Bronx, New York. Thank you so much for having me today. I believe that being survivor-led means asking us and implementing what justice means to us. so often throughout my case, I wanted to be seen, I needed to be heard. I was solving my own story, I was solving my own case, and I just wanted justice to be done, and it took that 188 to ask, well, what does justice look like for you? And that is when the doors open. So, being respectful of time, I will say implementing justice and listening to us about what justice is. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lisbeth Perez. I'm a former undocumented survivor of domestic violence. And I just want to start by thanking every survivor, advocate, and leader who did not forget about undocumented individuals in VAWA. Thank you. Without all of you, 14 years later, after leaving my abuser with my 3 little ones, I wouldn't be here today as a U.S. citizen. And I know that's how many of you in this room, in this space, were born with that privilege, or it was easily given to you. But for survivors who are undocumented, the path is challenging. And I'm just so deeply grateful. And when I say I literally wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be able to enter this space without an ID. So I just want to say thank you. And for me, being survivor-led is including all voices, not just one survivor, but a diverse panel like the one that we have today, with different experiences, different walks of lives, with different challenges. When we include survivors, we need to hear the voices of all and not just one certain community or one certain population. And I just want to echo the sentiments of my peers, and thank you so much.
Well said, well said. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Crummins, and I'm from the beautiful state of South Carolina, and I also happen to be, I just saw a woo, I'll take it. And I also have the unfortunate honor of being one of nearly 80,000 individuals involved in the largest child abuse bankruptcy in U.S. history with Scouting America, formerly known as the Boy Scouts. And when you have the chance to go through an experience like that, you recognize the power of lived experience. Because words on a page, the definitions of Chapter 11 bankruptcy and mass tort reform and statutes of limitations, those words become a reality. We're 4+ years into this bankruptcy, and I can't tell you how many times I've watched or heard from individuals that are struggling, men that are in their 70s and their 80s, that have told myself, they've told their lawyers, and they have not even told their family of the struggles that they've been through. And that is the power of lived experience. It's understanding what it means when policy becomes reality and you have to navigate the world that's in front of you. And that's before you realize we also carry a lot of technical expertise too. Lived experience is powerful, and we're also bringing in expertise in social work, or psychology, or law, or any other number of fields. And I think that's incredible. The last piece I'd mention as we open up here is, when I think about survivor leadership, I think about the importance of calling in everybody. When you are catering and taking the time to support survivors in the most marginalized and oppressed groups that are often on the fringes, you make it possible to support as many people as possible. The only reason why I'm able to get the support that I've needed is because of acts like the Violence Against Women Act. When you support the ability to address violence against women, you make it possible to help people like myself navigate it as well. So this is a big moment and an honor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin Mathis, and I am a victim of stalking. I'm coming from the Dallas area, so very happy to be here. But 8 years ago today, my stalker went on to murder an innocent woman at a neighboring college. But with the help of VAWA, and a law enforcement officer on campus as I had just moved to UNT for school as a freshman in college. And I had this law enforcement officer that connected the dots to me being stalked before I knew I was being stalked. And this law enforcement officer stepped up. He not only educated me, but he went out of his way to inform the perpetrator that he needed to stop, and that if he did not stop, he would use everything against him to arrest him again. And in my eyes, I believe that every victim of stalking deserves that sort of assistance. And in my case, I felt as if I had a village, and it all escalated so quickly. I mean, in the matter of months, and that's why action needs to be taken quickly. I want to see more cases better handled in the way that my case was handled. We need to have more training for law enforcement and court officials, and I do see improvement. And I am so grateful, because if it weren't for VAWA, I don't think I would be here today. I don't think I would have gotten those protections, especially as being on a campus. But it's just got me through it, and I had a village, and that goes back to your question of what does it mean to be survivor-led, and to me, it's being vulnerable as well as having a village and coming together, and just like what everyone else said, we get the voices of everyone, and we work together to do what we can to make it better. And I just want to thank everyone here today for getting me here, and just thank you. I'm going to pass it off to Christina.
Koyana Gunishchish Hawa. My name is Christina Love. My pronouns are she and her. My family is from Ikikik village located in the Bristol Bay region, where we have been for 10,000 plus years. I was raised in the village of Chitna, which is on Atna and Athabaskan land, and today I live on Tlingit Ani, Tatsakahini, home to the Ak and Taku Kwan of the Tlingit Nation. I am incredibly grateful to be here. My mother is a survivor of boarding school, my grandmother, and I think it's just incredibly important. I own the title of survivor because it recognizes all those who could not be with us today. I love this question. I think it's something that I could talk to you literally about all day, all week, all month, all year. I could completely nerd out. I think the thing that's most important to say is that I am a survivor of domestic violence, of sexual assault, of substance use, coercion, and trafficking. And in my journey to get here, I was never